All right, my dear. So everybody's here and it's time. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to do a prayer of gratitude, and then I'll do, as always, a little recap of what is energy healing. And then we'll do a review of last night, some of the most important points from last night. And then we'll go into the healings for today's session. So the topic is the same from yesterday to today, but generally what happens is the sessions tend to evolve. So today's session will be an evolution on yesterday's, and we'll use yesterday's session as a foundation for taking off and doing even more profound and useful healing work in the area of today's topic, which is uprooting the seeds of karma. All right. Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being us, for being this live webinar, for being consciousness in its healing forms, for being consciousness in its constructive and deconstructive forms. Thank you for being our ancestors and for the sacred role of the ancestors in the manifestation of the human physiology. We're so grateful for our bodies because they let us do a lot of cool stuff. Thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom for acting as a bridge, for anchoring the relative with the absolute, and for supporting the flow of knowledge. Thank you so much. All right. So I'm going to close this little box here. Okay. Very good. So what is energy healing in a nutshell? Energy healing is using our awareness, our consciousness, to affect transformation on itself. So everything is made of consciousness. Even our physical bodies are just like very, very concentrated forms of consciousness. Everything is consciousness. So when there's a problem or a sickness or an illness or a concern, what's happening is somehow some imbalance or incomplete expression is working its way out to the surface. And so what we do is we fold our awareness or attention, which is consciousness, into the underlying fundamental forms within the field of self, which are responsible. They're like the seeds, and they're responsible for the problems at the surface. So what we're doing in energy healing is we're going to the source, we're going to the core, the reason behind the illness, and we're using consciousness to fold in on its own nature there, where the laws of nature are that consciousness can affect its own structure. It can self-affect. So we're doing that in the most intelligent possible way. And for that, we need a model. So a lot of what I'm providing for you, I'm providing basically two things. I'm providing a model, so we have a way of understanding what's going on at very abstract levels of the field of consciousness, so we know exactly where and how to focus our attention. That's the first thing I'm doing, is providing the model. That means verbally, right? And the other thing I'm doing is I'm acting as the mouthpiece for the work that we're doing. So as consciousness starts to fold in on its own nature at varying levels or degrees of density, then I'm describing it in the context of the model so that it makes sense. And last night we talked about the value of wisdom. That was one of our points, the value of wisdom and compassion in balancing or restructuring the way we deal with stress. Okay, so basically that's energy healing in a nutshell. So yesterday's session, one of the important points that I hadn't even thought about until we started the webinar yesterday, but it just makes so much sense to me, is that there's this principle, there's an old principle, that karma is unfathomable for the human intellect. that the human intellect is not constructed in such a way as to completely thoroughly understand karma. And when I was kind of questioning that in my own mind, like, why is that? The answer that came to me was that the nature of the human mind is to experience one thought at a time. And the nature of karma is to be so complex and abstract that in order to fully understand it would require a level of conscious capacity that is not wired into the human physiology. But the dilemma is that in the human physiology and in our human condition, we have suffering. I mean, people get sick, situations and conditions come up. You know, we're partly here. One of the reasons we're all here together is because we want to know, we want to learn and understand the very best ways to deal with stress and with unfortunate conditions and illness and so forth. So we have this problem because the nature of those issues, of those concerns, is that their roots are in karma. So that's where the little problem comes in, because we have to deal with problems. And to deal with problems, it would be best if we could deal with them from their seed or their root, but we're not actually physically wired to comprehend karma in its totality. So, However, the other side of that is that we can't stop trying. We have to keep trying. We have to do the best that we can from where we're at right now. So essentially that's what we're doing. And essentially that's what yesterday's session was about, was to dive in, use our awareness, dive into those knots of karma, seeds of karma, and look at them under the microscope. So we did that, and we came up with a model. And it was very interesting because for me, the model expanded because I was in your company, because I am with you, and because you're all of us together are looking from our individual points of perspective. We're shining more light into that topic of inquiry. And as that happens, more information comes forward. So we're actually leveraging the dynamics of working as a group in order to evolve our own capacity collectively to do energy healing. It's beautiful, so powerful. So here's what we came up with. Here's the model. Here's the model. The seeds of karma, at this point, my perception is that they tend to be comprised of threads of consciousness or streams of consciousness. We're basically karma producers, right? Because every time we have say something or think something, or every time I move my hand like that, it creates this like rippling wave that goes out into my environment and just keeps rippling along. It'll just ripple all the way out to the ends of creation. And every time it bounces against something, like my microphone or my computer screen, it bounces back to me. So I go like this, the energy goes out and it bounces back like that. And that's karma. The bouncing back is the karma. It's the action reflecting off of objects in the environment, both gross and subtle objects, right? Okay. So one of the points that I didn't get to bring out yesterday, we were doing the model. I'll finish the model, then we'll get to the point. Okay, it could have been inserted there easily though. Okay, is that each action, thought, or word, or whatever we produce, whatever action we produce, it takes on a form of intelligence propagating. So it starts to take on this form like a thread or a stream. And when it bounces off an object and comes back, it comes back to us like a thread of form, basically, of consciousness. And sometimes it comes back as a physical manifestation, but that's only when we get into a knot. So what happens is at every moment, what you're producing is coming from your level of consciousness at that moment. By the time it goes and bounces off something and comes back, you're more evolved than you were when you did the initial action. So that means everything that bounces back is old stuff. It's reflective of your past, It's reflective of what you were, not what you are right now. And we did a bunch of healing work for that. So we can go back and review yesterday for that. The threads conglomerate. So at any moment, this moment, we are all experiencing the influence of things that we did recently, this morning or yesterday or the day before, as well as the influence of things that we did millions of years ago. Wherever the soul was, whatever the being was doing throughout the history, all those energies are also coming back. So we have long-term energies coming back and short-term energies coming back, and they're kind of forming together to create the soup, you could say the energetic soup in which we're sitting at any given moment. All right. Because this is the state that we're in all the time, as long as that karma is kind of moving through the system, we're golden, we're good. Because if information is coming back and we are leveraging it to evolve to our yet next level of experience and expression, then we're fine. The problems crop up when a piece gets stuck. And so what happens is the first thread will come in and get stuck somehow. And usually it's because the way that thread resonates off of the individual field of consciousness at that moment is such that we're not able to fully process that thread. We're not able to like give it its due, so to say. And so as a result, it gets stuck. It'll stay. It's like, oh, you know, you're not handling me properly. So I'm going to stay here until you get a handle on yourself, until you get yourself together with me. So then what happens is when it gets stuck, it will tend to start to collect other threads around it, which resonate similarly, or which can reflect some other angle on that first initial thread. So we did a huge amount of healing work yesterday for the first thread. And the conclusion of the collective was to bring the first thread back to wholeness, to bring it, to fulfill it, to bring it to totality. Around these knots, after a while, what will happen is more threads start to conglomerate, start to collect around the first thread. And if many, many come and they become compressed, and we'll talk about the compression factor in just a minute, then what happens is the knot can become very orderly. When it's very orderly, it's like stable and it's harder to get rid of. So if you have a big stable knot of karmic threads that are locked around each other like that, it can be much more difficult to get in and untangle them. You know, it's like a chain that's gotten, wrapped around other chains or something. It can take a while to unknot. And the other thing is that when there's a knot like that, it can be very uncomfortable to deal with. And as a result, our systems tend to create a shell around that karmic knot of discordant feelings, usually discordant feelings that tend to repel awareness. Because when you have a knot like that, what the being does, what the self does, is it says, well, this is something that I'm having trouble dealing with. I need to wait until I'm more evolved before I look at this karmic knot. So I'm going to put some layers around it to kind of like quarantine and protect it. And a lot of those energies that come around it are things like discordant feelings. There can also be, I realized in the night as I was reviewing, there can be blind spots. People can put blind spots around their karmic knots so they don't have to look at them. The problem is that even if I don't look at my karmic knot, it doesn't stop me from having to deal with the consequences of that not being in my field of consciousness. So this is the common experience for people, is they've got some knot of karma sitting at some deep, like astral or causal level of the physiology where they can't really, it's very abstract, they're not used to looking down there, it's causing problems, or it's sitting there creating a resonation that there's like a block in the flow of consciousness through that area. And the result is something is manifesting at the surface of creation. When something manifests at the surface of creation, it's literally like a mirror image of that thing that's inside. And it comes to us through our environment so that we can comprehend it through senses of perception, and we can get a better handle on it. It lets us kind of play out an action of interacting. It lets us interact with it like a toy, like a child would play with a toy, right? Some situation arises, it gives you a chance to actually get right in and mess with it a little bit. So we did some healings for that, because they're old habits. This was from yesterday. We did healings, old habits. When a situation rises like that, to start off, the gut reaction is, oh man, this is terrible. This is bad stuff. But the thing is that the difficult situation rises up in order to disassemble something that needs to be disassembled and bring it back to the field of silence. And so the laws of nature of that disassembling process is that they're infused with compassion and wisdom. That's important to know, because it helps all of us realize when the situation is difficult. It helps everyone realize that within the difficulty, compassion and wisdom are also integral. They're like just tied right into it. All right, so we have this model. We've got these threads of consciousness, which are kind of a fine level of creation. By the way, each thread is sacred. Each thread is precious. You can't go in and slash it up or cut it up with a pair of scissors or slash it with a knife. No, because this is living, this is life force. So it has to be treated with utmost dignity, utmost reverence, and sensitivity. So we have these threads that are locked together, and then we've got a layer around it of discordant feelings and blind spots, and then also pain bodies. And that was a realization from yesterday. Thanks to you, thanks to everybody in the group. The pain bodies also, yes.
You said it was pain bodies.
Oh yeah, so we'd like a description of pain bodies. Also, everyone, most of these points on my knowledge base, anytime you hear me say something not sure, you can also check the knowledge base, and that's an ever expanding, and there are a lot of entries I still need to put in there. So anyway, this pain body is a defensive structure produced by the body on the level of consciousness that allows us to deal with uncomfortable situations. So a pain body is essentially a structure at the mental and emotional levels of being. So they tends to be more in the dense levels of the physiology. Pain bodies can even be at the etheric level, because they can include blind spots, but they're constructed to allow us to deal with discomfort. They mostly are comprised of attachments. So what the pain bodies do is they're like, oh, this situation is painful and uncomfortable. Well, I can enjoy that. How many have we known the situations where people kind of get attached to their negativity, right? They kind of enjoy getting mad sometimes, or they enjoy what, it happens. You see people who have attachments to negativity. So those are pain bodies in action. When you see that, those are pain bodies in action. They're attached, and they tend to form the outermost, at least as far as I know right now, thanks to all of us, we may discover more, but the outermost shell of the karmic knot. And it's another interesting point that I wanted to bring up that I was thinking about this morning is, since the beginning of times that I've been doing this energy healing, I've noticed that when I look at attachments energetically, they look like mucus. They look like kind of a cloudy, thick material that's hard for consciousness to penetrate. And I thought that was interesting when it came up this morning, because I realized, well, that's kind of what mucus does, right? Mucus in the body clusters itself around things like viruses and toxins and other materials that the body doesn't want. And it's this kind of cloudy, thick material that somehow supports the purification process. But it can also, give rise to inflammation in areas of the body and make the body very uncomfortable. And in the end, in order to get rid of the toxin, you have to get rid of the mucus too. You have to get rid of all of it. The whole thing has to flush. So anyway, I thought it was very interesting when the brain made that correlation this morning between the pain bodies and the attachments in the pain bodies and the and mucus. So just like the physical parts of the body have correlates in the field of consciousness. So also things like mucus. It's very interesting. Okay. All right, so moving on. Today's session I wanted to bring up this point that came up because a very interesting question was asked last night afterwards, which was about the propagation of karma out into the environment. Speaking of mucus, anyway, sorry. Some acts, some expressions propagate more fluidly than others. And some objects against which our consciousness or our actions reflect better than others. And from what I can tell right now, there seems to be a relationship between the type of action that goes out into the environment and the type of object which best reflects that action. There seems to be, and when I was thinking about it last night, I was trying to explain it. I was thinking about it in terms of wave functions and physics. That if you get, I think I need it. Does anybody have a pen? Oh, you've got a pen. Do you have a pencil, Mom? Okay, I'm going to draw everybody a picture. Thanks. I'm going to draw you a picture. Diagram time. Sorry, I don't have something. I didn't know that I was going to talk about this ahead. Otherwise, I would have gotten something from my green screen. But I'm going to draw a picture of a sine wave like this. Okay. Can everybody see that? That's a sine wave. Okay. Okay, so then when a sine wave comes in conjunction with another wave, which is like exactly double, this is how octaves interact with each other. I love music, so I like to think in terms of, but I hope that makes sense. Let's try it that way. Here's a sine wave with another wave that's exactly times 2. So if this, here's 1 unit of the sine wave from there to there, then this is exactly half of that. What happens is when you get to these peaks right here, the sine wave will be bigger. It'll be like louder, or it'll be more intense. It'll come up higher because it's got a double wave behind it. Does that make sense? But in this spot, where this wave is up and that wave is down, it cancels itself. Yes, constructive interference, thank you. That was the word I was looking for, yay. So the principle here is that there's everything in creation is humming or vibrating in its own energy signature or of its own wave function. And so if I make an action that goes out into the environment and it hits against something that's got a wave function that correlates in a harmonious or consonant way with my expression, then that is going to reflect back to me in a more dramatic and dynamic way. Resonance, yeah, it's like resonance, beautiful. I have a question that came up and an example, and it's a little bit on the dark side, so we're all in a very nice kind of lovely, settled, sacred space, but we're also working with our ability to deal with stresses. So I'm going to mention this in the most discreet and delicate way that I can. One person asked the question yesterday if we could do any kind of healing work for the event in New Zealand yesterday. And the example here is that if I go to the back room of my house and shut the doors when nobody's home and play my flute, that music that I create is not going to have a big reflection back to me. But if I go online and play my flute live online on Facebook, as the person who instigated the event in New Zealand yesterday did, then that's going to affect really, really, really a lot more people. And that's going to reflect back very quickly, right? Like instantly. He was live streaming. So like almost as at the time he was doing his action, it was coming back from anybody who was on Facebook at the time watching that event. And all of us also who weren't watching that live event are in the space right now. We're just going to go ahead because we have such a big, beautiful healing collective, and it's our joy and our privilege to use our ability to bring that compassion and wisdom into every experience to help. I'm just feeling that, our awareness with all the victims, and how fascinating it is that once a person moves across the veil and they're no longer yoked to their physical form, then the experiences that we have that we consider more abstract, like waves of emotion or loving thoughts or wisdom thoughts or beauty, things that are in a sense less tangible in our world, are very, very tangible when an individual has let go of the physical form and they're dealing with their reality in a more abstract space. There's still perception, there's still experience, there's still understanding. And what I'm seeing our collective doing is very beautiful. I'm just watching and reporting at this point. There is, in that event from yesterday, a tremendous amount of Rajasic and Tamasic energy, both of them. But the Rajasic energy is being addressed first, because the Rajasic energy is a little bit like the pain bodies and the emotions that cluster around a karmic knot. They tend to stop awareness from penetrating the knot sufficiently to unravel it. So the tamas is in the karmic knot, and the rajas is like all the stuff around the outside that kind of is like, nah, you can't come in here, don't come close to me. So when I was looking at it this morning, I see it propagated out to the collective. The event propagated out to the collective so effectively and so quickly that it rose to the level of an expression, a kind of collective expression of abuse. I think abuse is a good word to use, and exploitation. So that energy, that's us inside the knot, by the way. That's starting to explore inside the knot. This is so important that I really wanted to share with everybody. Through history of humanity, we have been aware, every time there's some awakening of awareness, which is exactly what's happening on Earth right now, there's been, we've got a chat coming in, someone come in the chat, we're not seeing it. Oh, somebody's lost internet, my love. We've got the Mercury retrograde is not good for our technologies. It's been evident that there are particular dampening energies that are holding down the field of the human collective. So what was done years ago, centuries ago, was the human collective said, okay, we're going to take our best champion and put him up in front of that energy, and he will be our, all the collective of the world will be behind, or as much as we can muster, we'll be backing up that one champion, and that champion's going to go out there and he's going to fight that darkness for us. And so then you get stories like the crucifixion of Christ. Unfortunately, it was evident at that point that one person going up against that darkness doesn't quite, it's not enough. So then, later, the idea came up, well, maybe we need to address it as a collective. That seems like a better idea. Let's not put one champion up against that darkness. Let's put a whole army of people up against that darkness. And that is when we got the events of the last century. The Bolshevik Revolution, 150 million people were killed. The Second World War, was it like 60 million people? I think it was around 60. Easily. She lived through it. Yeah. I think 40 million Jews, but I think it was more. Yeah, and the price was too big, and it didn't get rid of it. So now we're at this new junction point. And the new junction point says, and when I mentioned the thing in New Zealand, that's what I thought of, was that's that same darkness. That is that same energy that had basically gripped a couple. I understand there were at least 2 individuals involved, 2 locations involved, that gripped these individuals and completely took them over, like owned them, and just used them like a parasite uses a host. So now what we're doing is we're saying, okay, armies don't work. And putting our best champion, even if he's like absolute purity incarnate, that doesn't work. So now we're saying, okay, we need to use consciousness. We need to come at it. We need to meet it. We need to slide underneath that darkness. We have to go to the source of creation, which is absolutely light. It's absolutely good. It's absolutely life-supporting. It's absolutely beneficial. And come at it from the underneath side so that we can take it out. It becomes small. See, up till now, the experience has been we're dealing with something massive. How can we possibly deal with it? And now the experience is, oh, well, what we do is we become massive, like more massive than the darkness. And then from a more massive position, that thing that looked like such a big monster thing, it's actually limited in its scope and its sphere. It ties in with the mucus because I started really noticing this in a more kind of in my face kind of way, no pun intended, and around December, sometime in December last year, and have been looking at it and realized that, as you guys know, I've got protocol up on my website for getting rid of viruses, and you know, I mean, the virus is like nothing for me. Like 10 minutes, it's out of my system. However, this last week, I've had this virus that's been, it's like we've been dancing together or something. Like, it's like barely there, but not quite, but then slightly. And if I make the slightest move, it'll come in closer and like that. And we've been like back and forth tangoing. I've been tangoing with this guy. And I realized that the reason that it came up in this form at this time is it's finally at the point that I can deal with it as a virus, because I see that darkness as a virus that's gripping you. It acts like a virus. It's like an energetic virus that's at a plague level on Earth, and it's gripping everyone. So part of my job is to be the mouthpiece and to find the models to present to you guys so that we see them, and then we can get our awareness in there in the most appropriate manner. So the virus comes in because underneath it, there's a knot of karma sitting in humanity's collective. The illness isn't the enemy. The darkness isn't even the enemy. The thing that we're having to look at, see, if we try to attack that darkness, it will destroy. So we can't do that. We've done that. We tried it as individuals, we tried it as collectives, didn't work. So now what we have to do is we have to go in a more self-referral manner, and we need to find that knot of karma that sits in the human collective, which is responsible for that effect of that virus coming out to the surface. I'm not sure I want to look at that. That sounds scary. But you guys are all so beautiful and so powerful and so amazing. I think we can at least look at it. It won't hurt us to look at after all, we're not having to look at the darkness. We're just looking at the karma that we have. So that should be possible. The fact that my gut reaction was scary is because there's the shell of fear around that karma is so thick. See this mountain? See that mountain? It's like that. It's like a thick shell of fear that's around that virus, that's around that, around that karmic knot. Okay. So we're big, we're brave, we're strong, we can do this. I'm going to slowly, gently, finding the first thing that's happening is stabilization of dharma. All of us, dharma, in its purest and most complete and most stable form, looks like, oh, look at that. Got to make a note. There's a dharma matrix. I didn't know that. Thank you. Thank you. See how cool we are? Okay, there's a dharma matrix. The dharma matrix is establishing for all of us in our body elementals. We talked about that yesterday. The body elemental is the overarching intelligence of the physiology responsible for protecting us, for protecting our bodies. Anytime you heal a wound or get over a cold or repair or even grow some scar tissue, whatever we need to do, anytime that happens, the body elemental is responsible for that. It's responsible for the health and the maintenance and the perpetuation of energy and life force in the body. Yes, well, it's like, you could call it the king of the devatas of the body. Like if the body's full of little devatas, like every time the heart pumps and every time the food digests and every time, you know, the gallbladder makes some bile or something, there are intelligences in the body responsible for that action. And, you know, it's an intelligent process, but collectively, the body elemental oversees all that. It oversees all that. It's a big form. Also on the knowledge base. I need to add to that page because I'm learning so much about it because of all of us together. So sweet. I appreciate it. Okay. So the body elemental is stabilizing with a dharma matrix. So the dharma matrix, we can think of that like a gift for our body elemental. It is a stable structure comprised of threads of consciousness, which form into a beautiful sacred geometrical form, and every single node in that form reflects dharma in one of the four legs of dharma or some elaboration or combination of those legs. What I'm seeing is it forms them and then it builds up in layers. And this matrix looks like it's kind of a fractal in form. So the outer edges of the matrix are like finer, thinner threads, and the inner part of the matrix is like thicker threads. And as it goes out, you get layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. See, of these different combinations of the aspects of dharma, truth, compassion, purity, and austerity. This alone, even if we don't even go and look at that knot of karma, even if we don't even, this alone is, I feel, important for all of our physiologies to support health, but also to support the resilience of the physiology in the face of stress. That's why it's happening. It's like a kind of a shielding. We could think of this dharma matrix as a shielding for the being, for the physiology, at a very subtle level. And all the devatas, because the threads get finer, finer, finer as they get out to the edges, all those very, very fine intelligence of the body responsible for how the kidneys filter out minerals and all those little things, they're also parts of this matrix that accommodate those very fine devata, you know, how the food is metabolized inside the cells. Little tiny devata, little tiny intelligences. So I'm just using my awareness right now. I'm kind of enjoying looking at that and seeing how that integrates into the physiology at the level of the body elemental and the entire Davic intelligence of the physiology. Nice. Okay. Okay. So, not to disappoint anyone, but I'm looking into our collective at how this matrix is interfacing with the body elemental and all that. And what I feel is that we need, as a collective, it would be good for us to stabilize this more. It would be very nice for us to stabilize this, to get used to working with it, to understand more. But it's brand new. Look at this. This is a brand new thing. It's brand new on us right now. And so I feel that it might be good to field a few questions at this point and then see how we're doing in about maybe 20 minutes. And then if it's feeling more stable for everybody, then we can go into the knot, okay? So we're not gonna jump in that pool just yet. But that's just what it feels like to me, and it's good to go on that too. And that was also one of the points from yesterday, that the fact that karma is not fathomable to the human intellect doesn't mean that we can't still grasp and understand it through other aspects of our intelligence. There's a whole neural net around the heart, and the whole heart area of the physiology is responsible for understanding, and the whole gut area is responsible for all that pure sensation and pure experience. And so we can, I think, understand from those levels of self. Okay. And then just before I go to the question, then the one other thing I wanted to say about that was, I think one of the reasons it's so difficult to wrap our minds intellectually around the concept of karma is that the laws of nature are so variant and so complex regarding what types of impulses of intelligence we put out versus what types of objects those intelligence reflect from. Like that's, you know, that's really, we're talking like the whole universe. It's a lot. It's a lot to try to take in with the intellect that goes one thought at a time. Yeah. This the point here is that the study of Jyotish is like that, and that Jyotish is a way of kind of it's a beautiful, like, God-given model for understanding the effects of karma, because we didn't create the planets, at least as our little individualities, we didn't, but being created the planets, but it created them in a very specified way, in a very mathematically precise and concise movements. And so it's observable, it's dependable, it's beautiful. Yeah, and Jyotish is intimately tied up with karma. But again, the point from yesterday, which I think I'd like to repeat for people today, because it's a really important point given to me by my dear friend who does Jyotish, is that the planets themselves are all sacred beings. And they're not, it's not like they're really bad. Like there are categories like malefic and benefic, but even a malefic planet isn't really a bad planet. It's just that the effect, the way we respond to that particular intelligence of that particular planet, could create trouble for us. But the same planet that creates trouble for one person is a blessing for another person. So it's more about the way we respond to those energies than it is about the energies, the planets themselves being bad or good or something. I hope that makes sense. Thanks, good question. Okay, here's a question. Oh yeah, I love this question. Okay, so yesterday we did some healing for a lady who had pain in the lower back. And what she was experiencing was this, oh, I can't remember the name of it, hang on. I have the question right here. It was this sort of like, where her legs jerk. Restless leg syndrome. Restless leg syndrome. So the thing about restless leg syndrome is that is the nervous system. So that's why that healing came up. So his question was, is there any reason that pain in the lower back and hips would be associated with deterioration of the myelin sheath? rather, and why this pain might not be from deterioration of the joints or something else like that. And it certainly could. You know, that certainly could be also another factor, but the restless leg is definitely nervous. It's the nerves. And that, you know, the nerves functioning like that also because they're not feeling plumped up enough. But then if there's also a certain amount of like bone on bone, you know, or lack of other tissues, supporting tissues around them. Also, we had some energy healing for omega-3 to bring more of the nutrients into the body that are required to build up those myelin sheaths. And what were the other supplements I suggested? So I will put the link to the omega-3 and the link to the other supplements in my follow-up to everybody. I hope my dear husband who takes notes, could you make a note to put in the omega-3 and the other supplements? Thank you. So I once taught a lady to meditate in Kansas City, and she was a middle-aged woman, I think in her 60s. She was about in her 60s, and she said as a young woman she had multiple sclerosis, which is a thinning and reduction, among other things, is a loss of the myelin sheaths around the nerves. And she said that she cured herself. She was in a wheelchair. She had little children. She was wheelchair bound. But she would sit, and it wasn't really meditation, but she would do a visualization where she envisioned her conscious awareness moving up and down her spine like little workers. She imagined like little workers, the Devata, right? She imagined them going up and down her spine. This was way before she ever learned meditation. And dropping off loads of myelin, rich myelin at the different spots along the spine where the deterioration had taken place. And she said she recovered 100%. When I met her, she didn't have multiple sclerosis. This would have been a couple decades later. So it was a beautiful story. And she used visualization essentially to interface with the intelligence of her body that heals. She used her ability to support those intelligences which are responsible for building up the myelin around the spine to actually allow that process to take place on a physical material level. And it worked. So the thing about all the intelligences of the body is that they communicate through the universal language of perception and experience. So we absolutely have a direct line of communication to all that resource that we need to heal ourselves. Same with broken bones. There are specific types of Devata that will go in and knit the bones back together, and they can do it very, very quickly with support. Okay, another question. Okay, so here's a lady from Canada who's asking, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of answering this question. Her father died due to MS. And there's a lot of research on MS about boosting the body's ability to repair damaged myelin. And stem cells can grow into different types of tissues. And we're making stem cells in various places in our bodies. Our bones make stem cells. There's a spot right behind the sternum that makes stem cells. The inferior temporal cortex produces stem cells. There's a lot of places. So you're not, we all have an abundance. We have a plethora of stem cells. Our bodies are rife with stem cells to be produced and made into, whatever the body needs. It can reverse damage caused by age-related degeneration. So she's experiencing her body thinning out in a lot of places, particularly her upper body. And that could partly be age. But also she feels that there is a deficiency of nutrients in our foods, which I would agree. I think certainly processed foods and even whole foods these days, I feel aren't as full. They're not as rich in nutritive value because the soil isn't as rich. The soil's been depleted. So there are a lot of illnesses. She loves natural healing and the idea of extracting prana from the air. and using stem cells to regenerate the body. We did a healing for that yesterday, so you can refer to that one. Okay, so I think we actually did take a bit of a deeper look with that one. So I'm going to go ahead to the next question because we have quite a few. We've got 8 questions coming in here on my question box. Let me address one from the question box, and I'll go back to the papers. Would higher, finer levels of consciousness allow for a greater capacity to see the roots of karma? Good question. So this is basically, oh, and it came in at 11:08. Wow, thanks for that cool question at that auspicious time. So seeing the roots of karma or seeing anything at fine levels of perception is a byproduct of refinement of perception. And refinement of perception is a combination of evolution of consciousness and devotion. And devotion. Because devotion causes refinement, particularly in this area of the being. When I experience, and I love sharing with you, because all our human physiologies have similar laws of nature, right? We're all made of flesh and we're all constructed basically the same. So my experience is that I perceive the subtleties of anything that I'm looking at from the intelligence, the actual perceptual ability, which is in the chest area. And so we don't tend to think of our chest area as being a center of perception. We think of our senses of perception and how the input from our little, the little narrow channels of electromagnetic information that come in through our senses are processed in our brain. However, the whole body is like an antenna of the universe. And the whole body understands and appreciates reality from its perspective. And the heart center is able to perceive feeling. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. Okay. So this center experiences feeling. We process. We understand the fine signatures, energetic signatures, which are inherent within all things in the way we process the information here in the heart area. So anytime you do any act of kindness, that's why a lot of saints recommend their followers to do seva, right? Because anytime we do an act of kindness, we're engaging our intelligence plus and our actions, our good actions, with our love. And the love is you could think of it in a way almost like the first thread in the karmic knot. Love is like a first thread. It's an initiating feeling energy behind the whole ocean of emotional structure and feeling structure of creation. It is the principle. It is a principle structure. So we engage the love with the action, and the result is that an integration occurs between the finer level of creation, that causal level, the finest feeling level of creation, and the relative material level of creation. When integration occurs, like this is our diagram, right, from very dense to very subtle, subtle down here, and then when it integrates in the middle, what happens is then it's possible to perceive what reality looks like on that level, and what reality looks like on that level, and what reality looks like on that level. It comes from the integration, and the integration comes from an action, creating karma, right? An action performed with love. So I hope that helps answer that question. It's something you can do, and everything, like breathing can be an act of devotion. Everything can be an act of devotion if that intention is there. We're focusing our attention, right, in the most uplifting and refined and powerful way. Okay, another question. Could we have the ability to understand karma outside of time? or through our superconscious. Ooh, she remembers the word from yesterday. Good job. Or through the addition of information from the heart and gut mahamarmas. Okay, let me look at that again. Could we have the ability to understand, what she's asking me is, could I please provide perspective on karma? Because I've given this, this model, okay, and the model is kind of from a relative material point of view. So she's asking, can we take a look at it from these other angles? Because she wants to get the whole diamond, right? She wants to catch it from each facet. Ooh, you're so good. What a great question. Okay, let's look and see. So first of all, understanding karma outside of time. The whole model of karma being comprised of threads of consciousness means that it's sitting at that level of consciousness which is already basically outside of time. It certainly explains why so many of us are dealing with karma, which is both individual but also family karmas, collective karmas, like that. So the threads themselves are non-physical. They actually reside at a level of creation which is outside of time. And the interesting thing about these threads is that when they become unraveled from the knots, when they're able to flow, in other words, when they're able to move with grace in through our physiologies and out again, in through our world of interactions with people and out again without getting stuck, then they're in their grace, you could say. They're in their grace, they're doing what they're supposed to do. They're essentially functioning as laws of nature. And they are blessing the whole creation. And that level of experience, that thread level of experience, is an experience of reality that is outside time and space. But when they get caught or stuck within the field of someone's energy system, then they get bound. The stuck portion of their reality, that stuck portion gets bound in space-time. And I think that's part of what makes them uncomfortable. They become uncomfortable too. They become uncomfortable, then they make us feel uncomfortable. So from that perspective, what we do is we can bring in our own resources that exist at a timeless level of our own being. Consciousness, awareness is unbound by space-time. So just by bringing our attention or awareness into those forms, we're able to unlock some of the bound or constricted energies that are holding those threads in place. And I've definitely found that just putting my attention on the threads helps, the karmic knots, helps to start untangle them. Okay, or through our superconscious. Okay, that's another angle. So superconscious, as I mentioned yesterday, is just it's kind of an arbitrary word. At some point, maybe I'll find a better word for it, but is the part of our being responsible for self-love, self-recognition, self-protection, self-acknowledgement. It is more like a function in the system, and that function absolutely can get blocked up or compromised by karmic knots. So that's interesting because I love it that you brought up this point. My friend from Louisiana brought up this point because it ties into the dynamics of what we're dealing with as humans trying to untangle these knots. In that we've got a problem that's making us uncomfortable, but to get to the source of the problem, we have to understand karma, and we can't because we have human nervous systems. So now what? And it's sort of like, this is a little bit similar, is that the functions of the superconscious, which is the ability to love and self-love, tying in with the last question too, right? Which is supporting also refinement of perception, that ability to produce those loving, supportive, and life-nourishing influences is necessary to deal delicately, effectively, and profoundly, like successfully, with the threads of karma that are stuck in the knot. But the karma will compromise that part of the being. Did everybody follow that? So the part of the being that you need to heal the karmic knot gets compromised by the effects of the karmic knot in the system. That doesn't happen with everybody. Some people are wired, it's internal wiring, based on ancestral patterns, beliefs, based on habits, a lot of people with habits of responding to karmic knots by compromising their own superconscious, their own ability to self-love. So that's something that I think right now we need to just stop and focus for everybody here, and particularly for those who don't have that as a specific feature of their own system, although most people have it at least to some degree, for the ancestors, because the ancestors definitely have carried that. And you know what's interesting about this? I'm watching it. We're clearing. Here's what's really interesting. Those beliefs and habits and discordant feelings actually comprise a lot of the material that comes and collects around the knot of karma. So by healing the superconscious and supporting its ability to act independently of the karmic knots, we're actually helping to disable karmic knots at a collective level of reality. Remember I said around 15 or 20 minutes, we want to go back into that karmic knot that's in the collective consciousness. So right there, guys, we're doing it. This is it. This misfiring, this dysfunction in the superconscious of so many people on earth, that when they bump into a karmic knot, immediately they feel guilty and ashamed and embarrassed and like they're terrible people. And obviously this proves I'm a terrible person and I'm not good enough and I'm unlovable, all that, right? We all know those little loops. That's what we're doing right now. That's a spot. That's a spot where we're on that sore spot, that little sore spot, and it's at a world level. 7-8 billion people on earth. Anybody who has this dysfunction in their superconscious. Okay, so here's what's happening. Here's how the healing is rolling. The body elemental is able to affect a healing for the superconscious. And the body elementals they're bigger. Okay, just to put the body elemental in another level of perspective, boy, I'm going to have to upgrade that page on my knowledge base. When the body is in utero and the placenta is also present, the placenta is the body of the body elemental. It is the only time the body elemental takes a physical form. After the birth, and the whatever one does with one's placenta, everyone's got different ways to deal with that. Then the body elemental remains with the soul, with the physiology, only as a subtle form. It's connected by the umbilical cord, right? The cord, it's like a cord of light. So the body elemental is able to function as a resource. This is what's happening right now, and this is worldwide. Resource for everyone's superconscious. There are some people who cannot, by any means, for any reason, access their own superconscious. Okay, I'm sorry. So, but everybody's got the body elemental, right? So that's why it comes through. The healing comes through the body elemental. Well, that's good. Okay, so what does the body elemental have to do to integrate the relationship with the superconscious, between the body elemental and the superconsciousness, conscious, and between the superconscious and the physiology and the being? And the answer is no, we're just looking at between the body elemental and the superconscious. That's fine. We just want to get that structure online. So there is a ideal structure for the superconscious. Like when the superconscious is functioning at its optimal condition, it looks like this. And so what it looks like when it's optimal is being received as a download by everyone. The people who can't receive it, compassion and wisdom, everybody. We need that one in big time. Because what's happening is this is shining a light on karma that is being held in various physiologies. And when the light gets shined on the karma, all of a sudden it comes to awareness, and it can be a very sometimes difficult thing to look at. But the karma is that individuals have self-chosen. There's an element of choosing to, for example, the virus, the guys who did the event yesterday in New Zealand, that was a choice. That was a conscious choice. That was a conscious decision. So there's a conscious decision that takes place that's behind actions which are self-destructive. And in every case where we've got people whose superconscious is completely dysfunctional, it's misfiring and it's not online, there is a conscious, in everyone, a conscious decision to be yoked to a level of self-destruction. It's like, in some cases, their vows and promises, those are being dissolved. We just gently, like no judgment on anybody, right? We don't know why, because everything is divine. Divinity is wanting to experience itself through humanity. And it wants to give humanity plenty of leeway so that we can experience a huge range of experiences. And we don't want to stop people from having the freedom to make their own choices and do what they want to do. That's important. But we do want to shine the light of awareness into the beings, because it's okay to do what you want to do, but at this time in creation, truth, the leg of truth, the dharmic leg of truth, is always evolutionary. So what we're bringing in is that. This is what our healing collective is doing for our world collective. Our healing collective is holding, anchoring strong the leg of truth. Sure, you can be self-destructive and you can mess yourself up and you can, invite darkness into your house and play with it. But you can't pretend that you're not doing that. You can't try to delude yourself that you're somehow doing something good, because that's where our strength is. You can bring in truth. That's where the strength is. So that's happening. And it's just shining the light of truth in all those spots where people are self-destructing. That's like the opposite. That's what damages the superconscious. And moving my question box over again. All right. I think we need to keep moving. Could we also understand from the level of the heart and gut mahamarmas? Okay, that's a little bit harder to answer. It's like a little bit more complex. But the heart and gut mahamarmas process information differently from the way the head processes. So gut mahamarma is direct experience, which ties a little bit into that previous question of like, how do we identify the roots of karma? We can feel them like a gut feeling. How many people have gut feelings, right? You can feel an area where there's no movement, where consciousness is blocked or not moving. And the nice thing about the gut mahamarma area is that it's possible to see structures of creation which we can't verbalize, which are very, very abstract structures of creation. So what we're doing here is, for everyone's physiology, just in our healing collective, is an increase of trust. So the causal field, this finest level of feeling, is instigating a wave of trust, self-trust. And that trust is resonating in the shaft of light, which is the inner core of your body elemental. And the self-trust will support, the upper levels of the body, the heart area and the head area, to accept and value and integrate information that we experience through the gut area of the physiology. Good. I'm watching. I'm also feeling like waves of gratitude and love flowing through a lot of people's physiologies. So bless you all for that. And may that reflect back into the gut Mahamarma area and upgrade, and also reflecting there into the gut Mahamarma area to upgrade that, and then also reflecting to the source of creation. So through the gut Mahamarma to the source of creation, gratitude flowing, and the flow of gratitude further integrates all the work that we're doing, and it also heals and tickles and delights the finer structures of creation, including another upgrade for the body elemental. Good job, everybody. And I'm just feeling that wave settling and integrating into the physiologies. So it becomes a stable upgrade for everybody's body. God, what a great question. Thank you. Thank you. I love you. Let's go here. I've got questions here. There's like 12 questions coming in over here, and I've got like at least 12 over here too. And we've got 3 minutes. Okay, so we'll see what we can do. 5 weeks ago, uh-oh, my friend fell on the ice and broke 3 ribs. Ouch. The karma has been a catalyst from the divine to become more sweetly, softly, and powerfully attuned to the mother of creation, to her with a capital H. Beautiful. Since I have the great fortune of being a longtime subscriber to the webinars, oh, he says that he watched all my webinars for the last 10 months while he was recovering. That is so sweet. And as of today, he finished about 7 months worth of webinars. Wow. 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 I bow down to you. I haven't even done that. Wow. So insights. Why? Why did I fall, basically? And how to better attune so that I can recover better. See you. So the ribs, the rib cage. The rib cage is the protector and maintainer of the entire heart Mahamarma area of the body. So what it means is there was a breaking of the protective covering around the sensitive, most sensitive level of the physiology. In order, I feel that part of it was to give being greater access to that area of the physiology. I'm very sorry it came in a difficult and painful way. But there are specified laws of nature, devata, in the body, responsible for knitting bone material back together. So these particular devata, these particular intelligences, can be activated with attention. So we bring our attention to those specific intelligences that knit bone. And it's interesting that, right, I was mentioning that the sternum is one of the spots in the body, and the bones where we make stem cells. So that ability of the physiology to produce cells to create new tissue, that is also activating. And I'm watching it and will describe to everyone best of my ability. The stem cells are the cells in the body that most closely reflect or express being, because they're like pure potential cells. So being, there's a kind of a cherished relationship between the stem cells and the source of creation. Also, I have a sister-in-law who's a medical doctor, and she was telling me that a lot of research had been done on embryos, and it was found that embryos are, it's like a new level of surgery that you can, evidently doctors can do surgery on babies when they're in utero, and the recovery is incredible. It's absolutely incredible because the little bodies, when they're forming, it's almost like all the cells are kind of like stem cells in a way. There's that kind of newness and freshness of it. So the body elemental remembers that time of being in utero and that level of freshness and pliability and malleability in the physiology. And are those energies which are being activated in the being at this time by the body elemental. We bow down with reverence to our beautiful body elementals to heal anything in the physiology. And everybody else listening, if there are any spots or areas or conditions or structures in the body that need that level of support, they're activating. It's activating to help rebuild tissues and rebuild them. She said the amazing thing is that the infant will come out without scarring. So even to be able to rebuild the tissues without any scar tissue. I'm also seeing that underneath the break, that one of the threads in the karmic knot was also, there was a bit of a lack of self-trust. There was some also self-doubt and self-trust. Lack of self-trust were also in there. So that's part of what establishes as the healing process takes place, and I'm sure is a great support for your ability to feel closer to your own divine expression. All right. Okay, I'm looking at our clock, and we're over our hour. So I'm sorry that I'm not able to go into more questions because they're great questions. Oh, someone in the question said, we can do this. Yes. Well, we're definitely going to keep addressing the world issues as we're going along. Anyway, there are a lot of questions I didn't get to today. So I'll look over everything and see if there's any way that I can do a little bit extra work to support everybody with that, because I do so much appreciate everyone's questions and enthusiastic engagement in the webinar process. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for the opportunity to be the expresser of all this work that's being done. I'm so grateful, and great, huge waves of love going out to New Zealand and the whole world. Thank you everyone, to all your ancestry. Thank you for being with me, and I look forward to sharing these events with you in the future. Bye.